and emerging. We also pay our respects to Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here tonight or who may be watching us online. The Nearby Victorian History Library has called Prahran home since 1854, and we're the second oldest public library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 70,000 items, and we take great pride in being the sole library in Australia with such a specialised and extensive collection that's available for loan. Our focus remains rooted in local history and housing a wealth of information encompassing most towns in Victoria. A few admin things for you tonight just before we start the talk. The bathrooms are back through the main doors behind you. Take a right and then the doors on your left. You'll see there is signage. Emergency exits. There's one outside of this door where you would turn right and then follow this emergency signs down the stairs to outside, or you can go back through the main doors and back out down the stairs to the street. But in the event of an emergency, the library staff will direct you out of the building. Our library staff tonight are Jade and Ellen, and thank you both very much for hosting us. They'll be taking some photos and videos during our event tonight, so they're for promotional purposes, but if you prefer not to be included, please let us know. So tonight's presentation is celebrating National Archaeology Week, and to help us celebrate, we have Philippa Hall, who specialises in architecture and conservation from RBA Architects and Conservation Consultants. We also have Meredith Vahulia, an Associate Heritage Advisor and Archaeologist at Ecology and Heritage Partners, and she has more than 13 years of archaeological experience working in Victoria. And I've had the great privilege of working with Meredith for a few years in the past. We also want to acknowledge the Australian Archaeology Association for funding to support this event this evening. So they've helped to provide the refreshments for everyone tonight. So I'd now like to hand over to Philippa, and please welcome them both.
Okay, and I'm just going to put this here. Good. And can you all hear me okay? Is it too quiet? Great. So over the last 7 years, RBA have worked on the conservation of 3 different rooms in the suburban fringe of Melbourne. Although the location and policy have been similar for all 3, our approaches have been quite different. And given this is National Archaeology Week, I'm presenting with Meredith. We worked with Meredith and her team on the second ruin in this presentation, which has archaeological as well as built heritage controls. Through this project in particular, we were able to understand much more about the building and the people who lived there. Meredith will be presenting these findings later in the presentation. All 3 ruins are located in the rapidly growing suburbs to the west of Melbourne and to the east of the Werribee River, which kind of meanders through the centre of this map. And long before the arrival of Europeans, the land served Aboriginal people, families and communities for countless generations. Sorry?
A little bit louder.
Okay, is that better?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Long before the arrival of Europeans, the land served Aboriginal people, families and communities for countless generations. The name of the Werribee River likely comes from the Bunurong name Werribee Yaluk. Yaluk translating as waterway, and Werribee is spine, which emphasises its importance. It's a boundary and a meeting place between the lands of the Wiradjuri, Wadawurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. Their understanding of country allowed them to sustainably manage the land and water, and was later recorded by Europeans. Colonialism devastated their way of life and their connection with the land. Some of the earliest conflicts between First Nations peoples and European colonial invaders in Port Phillip occurred in this region. European farmers altered the landscapes and brought pastoral and economic growth that displaced and possessed First Nations people and undermined their cultural practices and knowledge. This image is made up of 2 maps by W.W. Dart. It divides the country into probably a familiar grid. Even at this early stage, 4 structures are shown, and more continue to be built as squatters' rights formalised leaseholds and land ownership. Homesteads were typically constructed using readily accessible materials, including basalt quarried informally on the sites or nearby. This approach continued, and by 1933 on this map, the area had been divided further, with a number of smaller farms visible within the same grid. In 1969, the devastating Lara fires spread through the area, destroying almost all homes, 60 properties in total. Residents fled without belongings, and many never returned. Those buildings which were not destroyed were almost all abandoned. By the early 21st century, the area was in another period of change, the redevelopment of the farmland for suburban residential uses. The approximately 30 buildings from the 1933 map are shown here, although by 2011, those shown in red had vanished, either during the fires or subsequently. Those in blue remained, typically as abandoned ruins on privately owned farms, and the three in yellow at the edges of the development at the time had been conserved in some form. Typically, this conservation within small parks featured walls truncated or rebuilt to sill level. Hogan's house on the right-hand side, with a heritage overlay, retained a few almost full-height external walls. By 2013, in this aerial view, a train line was constructed, so you can kind of see the scar meandering through again. And suburban development continued apace over the next few years, approaching and surrounding many of the retained ruins. The ruined homesteads, which had contributed to the dispossession of the Bunurong people, now appeared under threat themselves from urban sprawl. Through the development of strategic plans, the implementation of heritage overlays, and the inclusion of permit conditions on any permissions given to developers, Wyndham Council have fought to not only prevent demolition of these ruins, but also to require their integration into the growing communities, something which would have been nearly impossible had they remained in private ownership. So in this context, RBA have been working with both developers, pursuing the contemporary typology of residential subdivision, and with council, seeking to conserve its heritage assets, a potentially conflicting pair of aims. So starting with this property, Doherty House, the site was originally owned and the house was built by local councillor William Doherty in 1877. It was originally a two-storey building, with the second storey demolished sometime in the early 20th century due to instability. An interview with a family member who lived there as a child revealed the story of a hurried escape in the back of a stranger's ute as the fires swept across the grasslands. The place had spent roughly 40 years as a two-storey structure, 50 as a single-storey one, and now 56 years as a ruin, an important part of its history and overall heritage value. By the time of our initial involvement, the ruin had been subsumed by vegetation, concealing its condition, although apparently partially supporting some of the walls. With the vegetation almost clear and amid new housing delivered by the developer, our role was to propose and administer conservation works as a condition of the planning permit. Throughout this process, both we and council were aware of the adaptive reuse potential of the site, and we were able to develop feasibility options for that adaptive reuse alongside the initial conservation work scoping. The conservation works included the replacement of cracked stone lintels with timber, repointing, and the installation of steel posts to support chimneys and walls, which you can just see in the image on the right there, the black verticals. The stabilised ruins celebrated and provided a tangible connection to the area's history and enabled its future adaptive reuse as a cafe. Now being constructed, this new layer preserves legibility of the building's previous stages of development and change, while providing a place for the local community to gather. With the stabilisation works complete, we were engaged by a different developer at a nearby property, Missen House. Likely constructed in the late 19th century, Missen House was owned by the Missen family from 1901. Smaller and in worse condition than Doherty House ruin, Missen House nonetheless retained 2 fireplaces and 1 chimney, some external walls and openings, and remnant internal and external wall finishes. Unlike Doherty House ruin, there was no proposal for adaptive reuse. The conserved ruin was to be integrated into a heritage park. In developing conservation works, it became clear that the level of intervention required to make the ruins safe for inclusion in a public park would be greater than if it were simply stabilised, so almost propped up with access restricted. In addition to structural stability, safety considerations such as passive surveillance, vandalism, and climbability needed to be included. After much consideration, it was determined to prioritise safe access to and engagement with the ruin. This required excavation and archaeological consents, which is where I'll hand over to Meredith.
Thanks, Philippa. Let's see how well I can drive this thing. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the land on which we are enjoying this presentation tonight. But I would also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the land on which these projects took place. And our work at Missen House did proceed with the participation of Bunurong people. They have been consulted in the development of the park. And when we found occasional Aboriginal artefacts in and around the ruin, we were engaging with them to make sure they were collected and safeguarded. Yes, okay. So the Missen family were early farmers in Tarnee, holding more than 750 acres of land here and in Truganina and Rockbank. William Missen purchased the land in 1897, and during our work on site, Luke Tierney, his great-grandson, became a regular visitor to see what we were doing, how the progress was, and he provided this photo to our team, and with his permission, it was included in the conservation management plan. He told us that the house was built around 1905 by William and his wife Margaret, formerly Margaret Hopkins, and this photograph is facing Doherty's Road, so this is the south facade of the house, and the small child sitting on the rock is Alan Century Missen, so he was about 5 or so at this time, so we've got an early 1900s date for this photograph. And as Philippa said, on the 8th of January in 1969, we had fierce wildfires that went through and Missen House was destroyed. So the first of the consents that we were issued by Heritage Victoria was to uncover the ruin. And during that process, the wonderful patch of prickly pear was removed. The ash tree that was growing up through the centre of one of the rooms was removed. And we were able to remove the debris of the collapsed walls from within the ruin. And there was also a concrete type of veranda, which we came to refer to as the apron, which surrounded the house on 3 sides. During the consent to uncover works, once the vegetation was cleared back, this is on the north side of the ruin. We could see, you can just see the edge of the concrete veranda here. And then we have the beginnings of some foundations that were exposed on that north side of the house. This plaster was more consistent with the plaster that was used inside the house and suggested that that was actually an internal wall, not the outside of the cottage. The second consent that we were issued was the consent to excavate. So the consent to uncover only allowed us to clear the ruins down to ground level and to nominate some areas that might warrant further investigation. So of course the first thing was this northern section. So this line here is the bluestone that we found under the first consent. And when we lifted the concrete apron, we actually had the full extent of this curved wall. A brick chimney, another foundation wall through here, and we also found this bluestone and brick paving, which we have interpreted to be perhaps the floor of a washroom or a laundry So that would have been the step in, and that path may have led to a wood pile or a coal heap or something outside the ruin. These bricks that we found in the chimney had maker's marks, which helped us to date them to around about 1910 to 1930, which indicated that that chimney was built after the original cottage construction. So the methodology that was undertaken under our final consent, the consent to damage, which sounds counterintuitive, but we were actually assisting with the rebuild. We initially used the excavator to clear the rubble and expose any potential archaeological features within the ruin. Excavation was required for some of the stabilisation works. On the south side of the house, there are now 2 supports, but we had to excavate for the base of those. We cleared the interior debris for drainage installation and surface levelling, and once those features were exposed, they were then investigated by hand with the following results. And I really must acknowledge the work of my colleague Cornelius at this stage, because he was often out on site overseeing the clearing of the rubble and the final delineation of the rooms. So you can see we've ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4 rooms, the 2 chimneys. This one is the one that has its full length. This one is really knocked off at fireplace level, and we'll have a few photos of that. In each of the room, we did have this line of foundations. In this room, there was timber impressed into the foundation along there. We had the internal corridor with the 2 walls on either side running across the middle of the house. In this southwest room, we had a polished concrete floor, which also had a line of ceramic tiles left stuck to the wall. So we could say, that's a bathroom that's been upgraded mid-60s. And then we have this final room also with a line of bluestone across the bottom. And the function of the bluestone became obvious. We had, these are some examples. We have timber burnt into the floor. We've got an impression through here. We've got a piece of intact timber from the centre. And we had the footprint of a timber veranda that was on the western side of the veranda. This was the side that did not have concrete. It had been buried under the tumble down bluestone. So we have interpreted these imprints. We've got another charred beam at the top here from the north as being the foundations for a timber floor. So we've got ledges that you can see on the interior through here. They would have stretched sort of across the room this way, and then you had another layer of timber placed that way. So we've got how the timber floor was built and supported within the house. And we've got a little tiny remnant of concrete half there. In terms of internal fittings, we had a terracotta water pipe that was inside the house. It's been cut by this wall, so we know that this wall was probably a later addition to this water pipe. We have a large terracotta pipe inside, which was within the bathroom, providing drainage to the outside. And the archaeological finds, the intensity of the fire meant that people just left. They didn't wait around to see what would happen. And I knew that would happen in somewhere along the way. In this particular room, the northeast room, I believe, no, this is the northwest room, we had this hip-like feature, and there was probably a dresser or something that stood there, and we've got teacups, plates. We know that the last occupants of the property was a Lieutenant Reed. We're assuming that he had a family. Either that or he was a baker in the British Navy, because we had these cream horns, the moulds for the pastry, we had the tart cases. These plates we had fused together by the heat of the fire. And we had a stack of cups also fused together, stacked in the same pattern. So a navy man, everything in its place, everything in order. Cigarette cases, so we knew that the tobacco lobby hadn't made their inroads yet, or perhaps they had. Buttons from his uniform, and we also do have some medals which we are hanging on to and will try and find where they need to go. So conclusions, we've got phase one, the original construction of the property, the bluestone cut walls, the wood timber foundation, the washroom, and thanks to Mitchell and Jenny who have worked on the project, we have some lovely drone views of these views. We've got the next phase of construction, which was the addition of the room to the north with the extra chimney added in here. Some photos there. Then we have an additional room of upgrades to the bathroom, chimney, restoration of this chimney in here. You can see that it's being propped up with bricks of a later manufacture to the bluestone. And we've got the footing of probably the basin. We did actually have the base of the toilet out on site as well, ceramic one. And then we have the final modifications with the construction of the concrete apron over the lot. So the dating is based on relative chronology. Most of the artifacts date from that ash layer from the fire. We have very few artifacts from the earlier occupants of the site. And I'm going to hand back to Philippa to talk about how the room has been restored.
Thanks, Meredith. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, alongside the archaeology and probably causing lots of the excavation to be required, was the conservation and stabilisation of the remaining built fabric. So this image shows the chimney, which was propped during the excavations. Due to its kind of structural damage caused by the fire, it required careful labelling and deconstruction, and then reconstruction on a new concrete slab with the replacement of stones damaged by the 1969 fires. And the heat of the fire was, as Meredith said, so intense that it damaged the bluestone. And Jeremy, our architect who was working on this one, was saying how it kind of touch it and it would just crumble in your hand. So impossible to reuse. Stone salvage from the site was reused where possible, but in reality, it wasn't always feasible. So new material was also brought in. To retain the full height walls, some reconstruction was also required at building corners. We tried and succeeded to keep the original wall finishes in situ throughout those works. Elsewhere, walls were capped with mortar and a permeable granitic floor finish was installed. Interpretation describing what was uncovered during the works and lots of Meredith's finds, and landscaping will follow in the remainder of 2026 to make sure that what we learned is communicated to the public. So I think we learned a lot during the Missen House project. And throughout, I think we kind of grappled with the conflict between ruination, which is an ongoing process, and the requirement to halt that process to enable public interaction. So when we were approached last year to prepare a feasibility study for a third ruin, Wattle Park, we were keen to explore the option for an alternative approach. It's likely that the now ruined basalt dwelling at Wattle Park was built in the late 1860s or early 1870s, although there had been buildings on the site since at least 1838. Unlike the other two ruins, this one had escaped fire damage. Its ruination was instead due to abandonment following the construction of an adjacent weatherboard dwelling in about 1915, which you can see. It's the one with the corroded roof. It itself was abandoned when another brick farmhouse, or another farmhouse made of brick, was built in the 1970s, and that's now vacant with ready to be demolished as part of the suburban development. So life continues. Further differences between this ruin and the others are also evident. The front of the building retains what appears to be original render with painted ashlar joints and remnant paint elsewhere. And because it escaped the fire's timber elements, including the doors and the collapsed roof structure, remain as they fell. Particularly obvious here is the fact that ruination is an active process. It happens slowly at times, but suddenly at others. This was demonstrated when we returned to site after a storm to discover that the chimney, which we'd luckily carefully recorded through photogrammetry a few months earlier, was now one more layer in the rubble of the former room. Despite this, we knew that to stabilize even the remaining walls would require a combination of underpinning, deconstruction and reconstruction, which would likely be more intrusive than what happened at Missen. It would also lead to the loss of the original mortars and renders, which make the Wattle Park Road unique. The Conservation Management Plan by Heritage Insight also notes the archaeological potential of the site, which has been occupied continuously for farming purposes from the 1830s until 2020. Despite the careful excavations at Missen House ruin and the learnings about the place, we're also aware of the irony, I suppose, of excavation. Uncovering and learning from artifacts also usually means removing them from their context. There were other considerations too. Like Missen House ruin, Wattle Park would be conserved as part of the Heritage Park. And in this case, the nearby land around the Werribee River, containing potential pre-colonial remnant vegetation, is also to be protected as a conservation reserve. While Reed's undertaken engagement with the registered Aboriginal parties at both Doherty House and, as Meredith said, at Missen House, the dispossession and massive change that colonialism caused, including through the grazing and quarrying that enabled Wattle Park Homestead to be built, is still under-recognised in the local narrative and in the statements of significance. And we wondered if it was possible for the varied memories to coexist here. And finally, while the ruination has continued, the plants and wildlife have thrived. The ruins become almost a haven for insects and animals displaced by houses and infrastructure required for residential subdivision. The first step to building conservation would typically be the removal of this vegetation and the associated biodiversity. So we started to consider what we were being asked to do and what the impacts would be on the significance of the place. The image on the left here is one that the client provided us with, a similarly conserved ruin in the US. And on the right is a kind of comparison of what the site was looking like at the time. So our experience at Missen House and our understanding of the condition of the ruin here made it obvious that stabilisation, while possible, would lead to a loss of authenticity and original fabric. And as conservation groups in the UK complained when ivy was removed from the picturesque Tintern Abbey ruins, would the site be not only preserved but sterilised? Conservation would also prioritise the colonial cultural significance of the ruin over that of the landscape, which was so altered to enable it to be constructed. As heritage architects, we follow the Borough Charter approach of as much as necessary, but as little as possible. Would doing as much as necessary to stabilise the ruin actually be too much? We thought instead about what as little as possible might look like. Could there be a way to keep the public safe while allowing the ruin to continue to ruin? We looked at contemporary precedents, which encourage biodiversity, and started to consider a secondary structure, not to prevent the walls from falling, but to protect the public when they do. The outcome at feasibility stage was a more messy, alive, and temporary as an interpretation of its past. Instead of trying to freeze the ruin in time, its ever-changing condition and that of the surrounding landscape would become the main event. So 3 different ruins, 3 different approaches, and the, I guess, overall conclusion that, as with all heritage places, there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to ruins. Thank you, and looking forward to more discussion.
Thank you, Philippa and Meredith. Amazing presentation, so engaging in such a unique project or series of projects. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking them again. So questions? Does anyone have questions? Jade?
I was wondering, from both your perspectives and your organisations, what elements of conserving these and digging in these ruins did you find the most frustrating? Like, was there anything you just wished it would give and it didn't, or anything like that?
Not really. I think with my job, it's a constant line of surprises as to what actually does lie beneath. Because when I was working out there and we had the level of the concrete hearth in front of the fireplace, I had assumed, oh, that must be the floor level, we've gone far enough. But then when the stonemasons had to begin excavating for their work, it became obvious that no, we hadn't gone far enough and there was much more still beneath the surface. And once that pit of artefacts was uncovered, it's like, wow, it's like a treasure trove. But then on the other hand, some of these artefacts may only be 50, 60 years old and very similar to what, I know I've got some of them in my cupboard. So, you know, where do you align that on archaeological significance? Is it who they're attached to? Is it the age? Is it what they can tell us about the people who live there? Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I've got a question about community engagement. It's really interesting as you've been peeling all this back. I'm imagining then, as you're doing this work, more and more locals are coming in to have a look around. Is it sparking joy? Is it giving something back to the people who are living out there?
I think people are inherently curious, and it's probably the same with archaeology. Once something starts happening on a site, people want to know more. When it's a ruin, people covered in plants, people tend to ignore it. But once they can see something happening, they'll come and they'll tell their stories. I know for Doherty ruin, the first one that we looked at, we were able to take oral histories with the people who used to live there, and they told us the most amazing personal stories. One of the ladies who used to live there still has an aloe vera plant, which she had gone back to take after the fires, and it was the only connection she still had to the house, and she gave it back. So it can be part of the landscaping kind of in the future. So that continuity, yeah, it's amazing with local people, and heritage kind of doesn't exist without people. So to be able to have, that connection, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's part of when Luke began appearing on site, because it is a construction site, it's dangerous, but he was able to wander in one day and we had a chat to the archaeologists while they were working on site, and he's provided us with, little snippets of background, family history. A lot of it has already been published, but, we have photographs of William Missen's pipe stem, for example, that he's given us, which aren't generally available out there.
Really positive community engagement there already. Other questions? Yes, Alan.
I'm just wondering, because I've seen driven around regional Victoria for a bit and seen a lot of ruins. Was the amazing conservation of these ones made possible because it's in a developed area and the developers are responsible for it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the drive behind it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the council have really grown as the subdivisions have happened. They've started to recognise and preemptively protect these places, and it's good. They're requiring more and more of developers. I think even compared to what they're requiring from Doherty's to what they're requiring of Water Park. Yeah, it seems like it's weird. Development is saving the ruins, which it feels like it's a contradiction, but yeah.
It's like getting a consent to damage to preserve something.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, council is coming on board and trying to create a heritage trail, because the Doherty site and Missen are only about 1 kilometre away from each other. So that's something that council can develop into public open space and spark that interest.
Thank you.
Yes.
I take it the developers are paying for this. What's the process of how much they contribute and how much does that expand or limit the amount of work that you can do?
So my understanding of this is that once they get a planning permit for the subdivision, the planning permit has a number of conditions associated with it. And one of those conditions is that they engage RBA, archaeologists, other consultants, to describe what works are required. So we have to kind of retain a bit of independence as we go through and say, actually, this is what the best thing is for the building, for the room. This is what you have to do, which requires us to have a lot of integrity and not just say to the developers, oh, okay, you don't want to spend that much money. All right, we'll let you get away with it. We have to kind of push back on them. But that's the process that goes through. So they engage us. We get all of the permits required from councils, building permit if necessary, and then they engage the contractors to
Do you have to pay for the scope, your own company have to pay for the scoping of the work before the developers come on board?
No, they take the land first and apply for the planning permit themselves, and then, yeah, they engage us.
Any other questions right now? Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how important it is to record the event with the fire itself versus what happened before the fire and like they taking any parts of that forward.
How do you mean record the event? As in just memorial, remember? that
Yeah,
it
like
happened? Yeah.
are you taking or are you trying to keep parts of the houses specifically to record the event of the fire as a part of their life, or are you trying to move before?
No, I know with Missen House there is the remains of a windmill that was on the site, and that's just completely twisted. We don't know where the head of the windmill is, but we certainly have the base of it left there. And council have made it clear that that has to remain there. There's also a burnt fence post with a bit of barbed wire attached in one of the dry stone walls. That also needs to be retained as part of telling that story of the fires in the Missen area.
And I think it's important as well that the fires, they were such a huge event, but they weren't the only event. So that's a layer of history, and it's a really important layer of history, but it's not the only one. So being able to understand all of those layers together, I think is also really important.
Another question from our very intent audience. A great question so far. I have a question. Meredith, I know that there was a lot of involvement of the Doherty people in the project, particularly at Missen House. Is there anything you would like to add? I know, obviously, I've seen you speak about this before, and I know that it's not necessarily your story to tell, but is there anything you would like to add about that amazing engagement with the traditional owners and their thoughts and their role as in decision making as well about management of the park and the place?
Yeah, so the Bunurong Land Council will actually be taking on the management of the park for the first, I think it's 5 or 7 years, but they are designing some of the plantings that are to be taking place because Missen House is located quite close to Dry Creek, which as a water source would have been very important for Aboriginal people. So they are designing some of the plantings down by the creek. They're implementing Bunurong, they're calling it a rainforest as in part of the park. The 2 trees, even though they're exotic trees, are being retained. One is a Currajong tree, which I'm not sure is exotic or not, but the park is actually being named in Bunurong language after the Currajong trees. And they're going to be sort of interpreted as a kind of yarning circle where people could sit down under the trees, talk about the events of the day and so forth. And they will be working on the management of the park moving forward for the next few years.
I remember at the colloquium when we spoke about this project, how positive Bunurong representatives were, and have been speaking about the project themselves, and they just felt like it was such a wonderful initiative between historical heritage and their cultural heritage. So I feel like that was a really it's almost a stand-up project in terms of.
They've also been involved in providing some of the interpretive text that will be going on the boards around the park as well. So they've named the park, they're assisting with the interpretation and managing some of the plantings.
That sounds great. It'll be exciting. When is it ready for the public?
I think the landscaping is due to start next month.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I'll be back on site watching them while they work around the ruins.
Does anyone else have another question?
The actual destruction in 1969, was it caused by flame or radiant heat or embers?
It would have been a combination. I know the fire in Tarney, we've got records that say it was started by a sheet of corrugated iron blowing off from somewhere and sparking the fire. If you think about the day that we had back in January where we had 38 degrees, the 100 kilometre an hour winds, it was those same conditions. And there were hundreds of thousands of hectares across Victoria. I think it was about 12,000 hectares in the Tarney Truganina area.
Very intense. I have another question for you, Philippa. Amazing to have that comparison of the three different strategies that RBA employs. Have you had any feedback yet from communities for each of the different styles? Because they are quite different, and it must be an amazing opportunity to sort of trial different methods of dealing with ruination and ruins and conservation.
Yeah, we haven't had feedback yet. It was interesting because the Doherty one stayed as a stabilised ruin for a while, and now is having the adaptive reuse introduced into it. It was strange. We got the photographer out there when it was a stabilised ruin to take photos that we showed as part of this presentation, and he was really confused. Like, it's a building site still. It's got a fence around it because council had put the fence up to make sure people didn't get in and hide there, or kids didn't go in and drink in there or whatever. So he was confused about whether it was complete or not. But I think as architects we quite liked that confusion. It still felt like almost like a mysterious ruin in the landscape, like it had done with all of the plants on it. But we knew there was something else coming. So that's a long answer of me saying no. But I do think there were other benefits of having it stabilised as a ruin. And I think council really recognised as well the fact that lots of the people that move into this area are recent migrants to Australia, who to kind of feel at home, to feel like they've got a connection to the history of the place. Sometimes having a tangible object that represents the history of the place, that they can see, that they can touch, that they can understand, it really helps to build a place around that.
No, I think it's really important, and that the point you both made about the authenticity of the original rather than just replicating or just rebuilding. It's a really important point, I think, and something with archaeology we come across, isn't it? Where like it's something that people are fascinated about, isn't it? They can touch the past. Yeah. Those stacks of plates from the Admiral, isn't it?
Lieutenant, he was British Navy. I was trying to find out a bit more about him and his family, and all I could come across in the newspaper is that he was stationed at HMS Beaconsfield, which is the mission to seafarers. So it was like the British Administrative Office. And before he took up that post, he was a professional footballer for Bristol City. That's all I've been able to uncover about him so far.
It's quite a lot. Yes, sorry.
Just interested in the intersection of the two disciplines of conservation architecture and archaeology. I was wondering if we could have a comment from both of you about that subject.
I don't know where to start. It's certainly been a really good experience for me working together with the conservation architects and sort of feeding the information between the two consultancies.
Yeah, I think we're, as heritage architects, we like knowing as much as we can about a place. and the archaeology gives us so much more. Everyone complains, about archaeologists. It slows the project down. Oh, it's too difficult. Oh, it takes ages. It costs loads of money. But the benefits that you get from it, and when it's well managed, I think it makes so much sense to have things happening at the same time. And like you said, seeing the stonemasons uncover things.
Yeah.
Working together on that is, I think it has to happen.
It's a bit like my love-hate relationship with bottle collectors because they go and remove the bottles from their context, but then there's a lot of information that gets published online about it. And I think it comes back to what one of the early archaeologists might have said about excavation is destruction, but excavation without publication is wanton destruction. So, being able to share what we found in forums like this or at the archaeology colloquium earlier in the year, in Moss Council, it's important.
That's a good answer. Yes.
Bill, what stage is the development around the 3 sites now? So if you did a drone shot, what would we see?
It's pretty much surrounded.
Yeah.
I know for Doherty, you can't see it in that image, but in one of the images there was the windows there, and you could see the suburban house across the road. And at Water Park, which is the one that we started working on most recently, there are people living 500 metres away. People are building. It's very close.
Yeah, I think we miss it. It's the last stage of an enormous residential subdivision. We're in stage 17. We've come up to Doherty's Road. There's some road realignment that council are planning and rebuilding, removing the dry stone walls, realigning them with the new road. But it's pretty close to being finished.
And with the Water Park, such an
Sure.
interesting. Sorry, with Water Park, such an interesting solution. Is that in place yet?
No, we presented it as a kind of a thought experiment, really, and we got them a variety of options costed, including adaptive reuse and stabilisation, and then this option. This was the cheapest option because it's the least intervention, but at the moment, I think it's something that we presented it to the developer. It's not something that I think council have considered. It's not, I think the developer thought it would be too much for council to take. And council, although requiring these rooms to be saved, they're the people that have to look after them. They're the people that take on the risk of the room collapsing and hurting someone, or people climbing the walls and falling off and breaking their arm, or something going wrong. So there's a lot of risk associated with that option, and it's an untested option, and I think it's kind of too much for them to take. So it was a great thought experiment, and I think it's something we'll continue to propose if we get more rooms, but in this case, it's not.
So they're probably going to look at one of the other options, the more conventional. Well, thank you for sharing it with us anyway. Do you have any other questions from the audience? We've had such great questions tonight, and then I might just thank you both again and just say how much we've enjoyed tonight's talk. And we just wanted to present you both with a little gift from the library. Thank you. So, I'll pass that to others. Thank you all. Can we? So I hope you've all enjoyed tonight's talk, and just wanted to thank you again for coming. The library has lots of other events on, so if you're interested, at the table near the door, there's a QR code so you can scan, or please feel free to talk to Jade, myself, or Ellen. And there's some refreshments at the back, so please, if you're happy to stick around, have a cup of tea and some food. I'm sure the speakers will hang around for a little bit. And thank you.